I've had a really lovely thought this week. Our subject for today is peace, fruits of the Spirit. We're continuing our look at fruits of the Spirit, and I've had this lovely idea that peace can grow. Like Monday, Tuesday afternoon, I thought, that is just the nicest idea. Peace can grow. So anxiety, if we can look at it like that, if peace can grow, then anxiety can what? Shrink. It can be overcome. And then I had a more gritty, more realistic thought, maybe Wednesday morning. Doesn't seem like peace is growing, actually. Peace is harder to find. It feels like that. And it feels actually more like, and this might just be the world through my lens, but it feels like it's not. It feels like actually anxiety seems to be on the increase. Peace is hard to find. This text is really, really helpful. I think it shows us a couple of the reasons why that is the case. Read with me verse 19 through to 23, or just have a glance at verse 19 through to 23. On the evening of that first day of the week, the disciples were together. The doors were locked for fear of the Jewish leaders. Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together, the doors were locked for fear of the Jews. The disciples were doing their usual thing. They'd been following Jesus for 3 years. They were going up to Jerusalem. And in those 3 years, they'd known some good times. They'd experienced some kudos, some adulation. And they'd not really changed any of their routine. And yet, they're in this spot where they are locked in a room, frozen with fear. What had happened was their external circumstances, stuff that was not really anything to do with them, had changed. An alien force had come from outside in and taken away their leader. The mood had changed against them. What people were saying about them had changed, and all of a sudden, they were filled with anxiety. I wonder if we could have the first illustration up. One of the reasons this text helps us think about that we're anxious is because what's going outside of us. It can be often very little actually to do with us and where our heads are at in terms of our anxiety, in terms of us not being able to find peace. Sometimes just all of that stuff out there can get into our head, can cause us to fear. I have a good friend of mine who passes off this bit of wisdom towards me quite frequently, and he'll say to me, "Control the controllables, Ash." Maybe some of you know me well will know that. It's a good saying, there's wisdom in it, control the controllables. And I receive the information, but I think to myself, it's not the controllables that I'm scared of, it's everything else that I'm scared of. It's the baddies. This world's got actual baddies. Did you know that? We've got actual baddies. People that we can have no authority over. There's uncertainties. No matter who we vote in this week, we don't know what their financial plan's going to be. We don't know what our finances are going to be like. There's uncertainties out there that we can do nothing about. There's what people might say about us. We can't control any of what people will say about us. Somebody might just start saying rubbish about us, and it happens all of the time, and there's nothing we can do about that, and it can cause us great anxiety. There's nothing we can do about some of the fears that we've got, some of the health fears that we've got. None of us know what's down the line. We can't control who moves in next door. Your neighbors put 10 or 20 grand on your house and your peace, maybe even 10 or 20 years on your life. We can't control who moves in next door. We can't control these things. They might be a pain in the neck. They might just play music all the time. We can't control this. We can't control, it's probably a nicer expression for this, but the nuclear nutters that are out there. People who want to go to war. There is so much out there that if we're looking for peace, we have got no control over, and we're at the whim of circumstance in that sense. And so we do, what do? We do often what the disciples do. Did you see what the disciples do? They hanker down. They lock the doors. They put the boundaries up. Do you ever do that? When you're worried about stuff? Stop watching the news, that's one of my techniques. Shut things out. People in your life that's giving you stress and anxiety, you just try and curb how much exposure you have to them. We put boundaries up exactly like the disciples would do. The other thing that we do, so there's what's out there that can cause us worry and anxiety, but the other thing that can cause us worry and anxiety is, and I would say this is worse, and this is me, what is going on inside? That can be worse. It can be, and I've experienced this, and I know a lot of people experience it, can be perfectly fine outside. Everything, all our external circumstances can be going really well, and yet we can have real anxiety inside. We've got this awesome character that we engage with in this text called Thomas. Doubting Thomas, crikey, is what we've come to know him as. And he's got this external trouble, but he's also got this internal wrestle, this existential internal struggle. His lead has been taken away, and he doesn't know whether he's coming or going. And sometimes anxiety can be just what is going on inside of us. I used to meet with a guy who had this real internal wrestle going on. He'd had a cancer 30 years ago. He was an older guy now. 30 years ago, and I would meet up with him regularly, and I would speak to him, and one of the traps that I fell into, I would talk to him about how he could be positive now, how that was all in the past, and how he could move on, and he had lots of things to be thankful for. I think like quite good things to tell him. And then one day he turned around when I was telling him this, and he said, "Yeah, that's true, isn't it, Ash? But we live in our heads, don't we?" And he sort of blew me away with the simple, powerful wisdom of that statement. We do live in our heads, don't we? It doesn't matter what I say to him if his head is troubled. And this guy was troubled internally. He couldn't park any of that. We see this borne out a couple of times in the Bible. Jesus sort of speaks about the depths of this. There's this lovely story where Jesus goes around to the home of Mary and Martha. I don't know if you know this story. And Martha's there cooking away in the background. And Jesus says to her, "You are worried." Maybe I've got that the wrong way around. Mary's cooking away in the background. "You are worried about many things, Martha." That's Martha. "You are worried about many things." And Jesus does a play on words. He uses this Greek word, merimino, which kind of means splitting into pieces. And he looks at her and he says, you are so worried. You are splitting into pieces. And Mary has chosen a better thing. Worry can be like that, can't it? We can have loads of things that we are worried about. We can have 1,000,001 things on our minds, and we can't focus. And worry can be like that. Or it can be like 1,000,000 things going on inside of our heads. Have you ever lied down at night, tried to get to sleep, and you've just got 1,000,000,000 things, and it feels exactly like Martha, where your head's just splitting? And you've got this, this internal worry of 1,000,000 things. It can be like that, or it can be like our guy Thomas, who's just got one thing. Have you had that? Just like one thing, like a weight on top of everything else that you can't move past. Not loads of things, just one thing. He's been following this guy Jesus all this while. He's put all of his energy into him. He's put all of his hope and his belief, and now he's been put on a cross. And that's undone everything that he believed in. And he's stuck in worries. So we can be worried. I don't want it to be too depressing. It's first 5 minutes of the sermon. I want to catch your attention. We can be worried about all the things going on outside of us, and we can be worried about all the things, or we can have nothing going on outside of us, and we can just have our own internal worries. I want to talk to you about one of the most iconic peacemaking moments. I don't think we've got a picture to come up. Maybe in all of human history. Are you familiar with this picture? It's one of the most iconic pictures of this moment. It was the Christmas Day truce between the Allies and the Germans, or the Nazis, against probably huge odds, in an environment of huge evil, like entrenched hate, and probably against all common sense. Two groups of soldiers come together, and they share stories, and they share food, and some would say they shared sport, and they share with each other compassion and care. It's an incredible moment, and it'd be right to say, I think, this moment, like other moments, has been a moment that we've not been able to forget about. It's moved our hearts in such a way that we are kind of always open to this idea of peace. It would be fair to say, I think, even though as we've considered, peace is really hard to find. We never can quite give up on it. It exists as a bit of an elixir, a bit of a drug in that sense. And we have tasted enough to know that there is a kind of peace out there, as we see in moments like this, that can dramatically change the world. We see glimpses of just this outrageous peace, moments of it, glimpses of it, enough that we can't really ever let it go, even though there's so many reasons why we can't get past our anxious states. I've got a theory, if you're new to Christianity, or if you're considering Christianity, about what that kind of peace is. When Jesus spoke of peace, when he speaks of peace in this text, when he comes amongst these disciples and he speaks of peace, he speaks about a peace that is not just a ceasefire. It's not just hiding away from the traumas of the world. It's not even about an internal wrestle. He speaks about a peace, and we've got this idea of shalom that's built up in the Old Testament and comes into this idea remains in the New Testament of total peace. It's not a 5-minute breather. It's not a break. It's this idea that Jesus brings to the world of complete and utter peace. It sounded a bit new agey in my own head as I wrestled with it on Friday night. This idea of completely being at peace with everything that you see. I was scared to say it, scared to preach it. I was quizzing myself, is this right? This idea of real balance. We who believe, who accept this peace that Jesus talks about, we know, this is what he's getting at, you can know the creator of the world. That's the kind of peace he was talking about. You can know the point of the world. You can know the point of yourself. You can know the shaper behind everything. You can know as well that there is good and glory and hope at the end. Jesus speaks about that kind of peace. Not peace that's 2 minutes escaping from the chaos, but peace that is able to look at all of the different eventualities of life and live in balance with all of those things. Your day's got a point and a purpose in it. Peace comes not just because you get a break from the day, but you know what the day is made for. Peace comes not because we get away from the chaos, but we know exactly what's behind the chaos and that God has his hand on it. God is watching over us. We say to ourselves all the time, don't we? Or I do anyway. I say it all of the time. I moan at Jude. I say, I need a break. I say it all of the time. I need a break. I need a bit of peace. And I put that onto her, but I don't need that, do I, actually? I don't need that kind of peace. I don't need 5 minutes. That's not going to cure me. It'd be nice. I need the peace that Jesus spoke about. I need that kind of peace. I need to be able to look out into the cosmos and it not freak me out. I need to be able to look down into my future with whatever illness or age that's going to throw at me or circumstance and be at peace with all of that. I need to know what I am here for. I need to know the God who made me. I think we see in this text one other thing, not just how our struggle for anxiety is brought about, but how we can know this real peace. I think the first thing that we see is in verse 19. This is the kind of peace I think that we want, that you need, that I'm advocating for. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus comes and stands among them and says, "Peace be with you." In a sense, this is just a momentary miracle. Jesus has managed to get in through locked doors, and he's able to be amongst them. But in a sense, it's a picture of the hope that we all have. Jesus comes and dwells amongst us. We don't look for peace on our own. When I used to play footy, one of the mantras that somebody would shout out would be like, get amongst it. Get amongst it. Let's get amongst it. Let's get right in amongst it. Love that word amongst in the middle of this text. Jesus, in the middle of their fear, gets amongst them. He gets in the middle of them. They're not scared, not because they've figured out what's going on, but because they're stood with Jesus. My experience of faith has been a really wobbly one from my end, sometimes, but I've known Jesus stood with me in all circumstances. My peace doesn't come because I rationalize something or I figure something out. Your peace won't come because of that. Your peace will come because he's with you. That's the first thing that I think that we see. Second thing that we see is this idea of perfect peace. It's not just an ethereal notion that we can have. Jesus stands in front of the disciples. He doesn't just say that I'm here. He says, I'm going to prove to you that you can know this perfect peace, that you can know complete balance with everything. And he shows them his hands and side. And he says to them, this is where death should be. And where death should be, there is life. Where death should be, life can begin. He says to them, this is where hate should reign. We should be really hacked off. This should be an awful, hate-fueled moment. And yet, here I am, pierced hands, and love has won. Do you see the peace? It's impossible. It can't be there. And yet Jesus brings it. And he comes amongst them and he almost says, this is where worry and anxiety should be. It's where it was. And yet he comes and stands there. And how are the disciples? They are what? Overjoyed. Where worry should be, joy is. You'd look at everything that's happened in the last couple of days and you'd rule out God. You'd rule out any plan of anything. Everything looks pointless, and yet Jesus stands in front of them and says, there is point and value in everything. There is hope. You can trust this peace. The plan's working. There's hope in it. So, and this is the most brilliant bit, we're thinking about how we worry. And we worry about what's out there. Maybe it's an oversimplification. It made sense to me. We worry about what's out there, and we worry because we've got things going on in here. But see what knowing the kind of peace Jesus brings does. Verse 21. I don't think they'd have been expecting this instruction. I would have wanted to go away on a retreat if I was one of the disciples. I would have wanted a few months and easing back into life. And Jesus says to them, he says it again, peace be with you. And then he says, as if to say, get out of here. We don't need to be in here. We don't need to stay locked up. There's a lot to be frightened of out there, but this is not why I'm here. This is not why I exist. As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. The peace that we want, the peace that I often go for over and over again is the just 5 minutes. Just let me shut that off. Let me shut those doors. Give me a break. Shut that person out. Shut the news off. Do all that kind of thing. The peace that Jesus brings is not that kind of peace. The peace that Jesus brings is you don't have to shut yourself off. The peace that's for you is in the middle of it all. You can know peace. Jesus equips them. Lovely moment in the text where there's this like reminder of creation, how we're supposed to be. He breathes on them, which in most circumstances, it's uncomfortable when somebody comes and breathes on you. When Jesus breathes on you, there's this reminder of the Spirit being revealed to you. There's this reminder of creation. There's this reminder as well of mission. And Jesus says to these disciples, there's lots to be afraid of, but you're not made to stay confined in fear. You are meant to be out there. The peace that we have is not peace away from the world. It's peace facing up to the world. Jesus sets us on an impossible but beautiful trajectory. He says, the peace that I bring you means you can open the doors to life and you can head off in the direction of knowing peace in and amongst, and this is what we need, in and amongst all of the dramas, when the noisy neighbors move in, when the health fears are there, when the salary fears are there. Jesus says, the peace that I've got for you is for then. But he doesn't just leave it there. He gives us something to think about, all the things that's going on outside. But there's the loveliest moment in the text when he grabs hold of Thomas. This guy who's not just struggling with what's going on outside, but a guy that I can really empathize with, and he's struggling with internally, is his wrestling match. And Jesus grabs hold of him and he says, what I want you to do, Thomas, in your doubtingness, in your fear and anxiety, is put your hands in there. I don't know if you've had the experience of people telling you it's going to be okay. I often say that to people. Sometimes it's right, but sometimes, even when it's been said to me, it doesn't always even scratch the surface, does it? It'll be all right. Yet when Jesus says it, when Jesus shows him his wounds, he speaks into Thomas's soul. The comfort and the peace that Jesus can bring doesn't just shift how we think about what's going on outside, it shifts how we feel inside. He speaks to the soul of us. That's not even the chemicals flying around our head, which can get wobbly about. That's not even our thought processes. He speaks into our utmost security. And I would argue only he can. We can know peace out there, and we can know peace in here.